So my name is Kinsey Brantley, and this is my GLD e-portfolio. This is my About Me page where I talk about myself and I talk about why I wanted to do GLD, thought it would help me further my understandings of my science classes, and then my plans for when I left Lancaster. And so the first key insight is rechecking to avoid vulnerability. Talked about how we are all imperfect and prone to error and that mistakes are inevitable, but rechecking can kind of minimize those errors. For example, I provided the SMART study that I participated in at Lancaster as an example, and we had to make sure that all the files were stored properly to maintain confidentiality, and we had to check after one another when collecting data and putting data into the computer systems so that everything was as accurate as it could possibly be. And it was natural for us to make mistakes when inputting the data, but if someone else was checking behind us, then that kind of eliminated the errors in the system. And I taught about my chemistry class, how it was heavy math based, and I'm not the strongest in math, so I had to recheck after my work frequently to make sure that I was turning in accurate and correct work. And so I discussed a particular problem called an icebox problem and how I was given a systematic manner to solve those problems. And then finally, I talked about my own personal experience of my father passing away and how it could have possibly been avoided through rechecking after his patient charts and his appointment plans. And then here's just my artifacts pertaining to that. And then here I have maintenance of constant cycling. I talked about my biology class and the neurotransmitters in the brain that are chemical messengers, how they cycle through our brain and combine with receptors for different task and information inputs, and how it can be disrupted from other things like nicotine. And if those cycles are disrupted, it can cause adverse effects in the body. So one neurotransmitter stimulates muscle movement, heart rate, and learning and breathing, but nicotine can block that neurotransmitter from binding to its receptor. And it can have adverse effects on the body. And then here I discussed how there's a cycle of blood flow, and that cycle is important for our entire body to get oxygen and other nutrients. And if the cycle is disrupted by poor gas exchange, a clot can occur. And then I discussed my first job and how we practice CPR. At my first job, and CPR in itself is a cycle with 30 compressions and 2 breaths for an adult. And the cycle of CPR is done to keep the cycle of the heart pumping. So CPR is done when there's a disruption in heart pumping and blood flow, and it's done to get oxygen back to the lungs. And then I also talked about how in their research experiences, we as students were able to create a proper cycle to get participants in and out. Our participants were coming in on their lunch breaks and in between classes, so they didn't have a lot of time. And we had to create a cycle on how to get them in, and we had to get them to sign our forms and understand what we were going to do. And then we had a certain systematic cycle of how they would complete different tasks and activities through our research. And so they always started with the first thing, which was height and weight measurements, and then they always ended with body measurement of circumferences. And so here I just discussed how cycles are natural and harmonic, and they are important to maintain balance, but we can also get monotonous in our routine. So it's important to recognize our actions and strive for mindfulness of our cycles so that we can better complete them and reduce the consequences of disruptions. And I just again included like a paper that I wrote on nicotine, some notes from my class and my CPR certification, and some more pictures from our SMART study data collections. I think actually, just to scroll back down, this day was a little chaotic, and so we had to constantly update our cycling so that we could get everybody in and out efficiently. And finally, practicing what I assume we'll preach. I took a nutrition course at Lancaster, and I learned very quickly that I was not as healthy as I thought, even though I was playing volleyball and I was active every day. I was not fueling myself with the right micro and macronutrients. And so I was eating a lot of processed food and I felt very lethargic. And I was also made aware of how terrible it can be on the body when you have high blood pressure. I was diagnosed with prehypertension when I was 16, but I was not aware of how bad the effects of that can be when I was 16. So when I took my anatomy and phys class, I was kind of faced with some of the effects and what it can lead to. So it's not good for your diastolic pressure to be high, because then that means your heart is not in a period of relaxation like it should be, and it causes the arteries to get hard and rough, and it can give rise to blood clots. So I was made aware of how important it was for me to de-stress and lower my blood pressure. And I also was a participant in the SMART study. I wasn't just a student researcher. We actually got my numbers for the data collection, and I was not as healthy as I thought I would be. And I was also shorter than I thought I was going to be. So that made my BMI higher, and I was no longer in the normal range. And my fat percentage was a lot more than I would have liked it to be. So I was faced with the numerical objective data of how unhealthy I was at the time. And in this final paragraph, I just kind of came to the realization that I could not be a physical therapist and ask people to be healthy and move their bodies and fuel their bodies if I wasn't going to do it myself, because they wouldn't take my advice with value and they probably wouldn't listen to me. So again, more artifacts. I have a nutrition paper with some highlights. Picture of me getting my blood pressure taken and those blood pressure notes. And then here's my friend Taylor taking my waist and hip circumferences, which were a little higher than I'd say the average girl my age, or at least the average girl at Lancaster. And then finally, leadership. So I wrote my leadership section on striving for professional growth in a PT clinic, and I'm sure this can be applied to other healthcare facilities. But I just discussed how there is a stigma for asking for help, and as well as not knowing all the answers when you first come out of school. And so these jobs could be demanding in their nature, and many employees will spend at least 50 hours of work a week. So that's a lot of time. And if the work conditions are poor and your employees are unhappy, they will probably not work to the quality that they could. And in healthcare, this affects patient outcomes. So as a solution, I said that I would demonstrate how asking for help is necessary and appropriate, and that employees should check behind one another, and that they should also practice healthy lifestyles that aligns with their own goals and the patient goals. And then to implement, for example, I gave the option of me myself asking for help no matter what my title is, holding meetings to ensure that everyone's holding themselves accountable and doing the protocols as they should in the systematic manners, and that allowing people to put their input into the protocols and the things that we do at work, because everyone can make patient care better. Everyone knowing their roles and their duties, so there's no confusion about who is in charge of what. And this will allow tasks to get completed faster. But also, if you are in a jam, you can ask for help, and you can ask when you don't know the answers to something. And we recheck after one another, and this allows us to eliminate errors, and it shouldn't be seen as an insult, but as help. Because therapy is not one size fits all, and everything should be modified and adapted to the specific patient. So sometimes it takes more than one mind to do that. And here again, I just said if other occupations in healthcare, like nurses, have to check over things so many times, then PTs and other healthcare professionals should be held to the same standard. And finally, it's important for employees to have proper wellness. Employees not only should be active when they can be and fueling their bodies with the right food, but also we should take care of our mental and emotional wellness. And that may mean doing things like taking longer lunch breaks, having adequate water breaks, eliminating unnecessary stressors at work. And then I said I would know that my protocol was working when employees are able to converse about their roles and mistakes without ill feelings, and that employee alertness and mood is improved, employee stress is relieved, and patients are happy with their care and rehabilitation. I put that one first because that was probably the most important to me. And then finally, I put a little artifact of an example of an employee satisfaction questionnaire, and it just has questions on here about stress, wellness, if their job feels demanding. And those would be given at employee meetings and done routinely, maybe like every month or so. But that is all. Thank you for listening to my GLD ePortfolio rundown. And if you are doing GLD yourself, I hope you have as good an experience that I did, and I hope you learn a lot. And good luck with your own experiences.